Hello and welcome back. I was on a business trip. In the middle of the night, my daughter called me. Mommy, Grandma forced me to sleep in the dog kennel. I immediately booked a red-eye flight back home and did something that made my entire in-law family turn pale. I still remember that night vividly. It was a freezing night, the kind of cold that makes you just want to curl up and hide. Yet, my life took a completely different turn all because of a single phone call. I was out of state on a business trip, having just finished a late-night meeting at my hotel. A stressful day of work had left my head pounding. All I wanted was a hot shower and a bed. Just as I set my purse on the desk, my phone started buzzing relentlessly. At first, I thought it was a coworker calling about the project, but when I looked at the screen, my heart skipped a beat. It was my daughter, Lily. I hurriedly answered. Before I could even say a word, the sound of broken, choking sobs came through the receiver. Mommy, Mommy. Her voice was trembling, so weak it sounded like it was fading away. I jumped up in a panic, my heart pounding against my ribs. Baby, what's wrong? Tell Mommy. It took her a few seconds to form a complete sentence, but every word felt like a knife carving into my heart. Mommy, Grandma made me sleep in the dog kennel. I'm so scared. In that moment, I felt my entire body freeze. My ears rang, my mind went entirely blank, unable to process what I had just heard. I gripped the phone, my hand shaking so hard I thought I might drop it. On the other end, Lily's sobs continued, mixed with the frantic barking of a dog and the metallic clanking of a latch. I practically screamed, "Who did this? Who put you there? Where's your dad?" My voice was frantic, trembling. Through her tears, she managed to get out broken sentences. Daddy went out drinking. Grandma said I'm useless. She said I'm exactly like you. I went dead silent. The face of my mother-in-law, Eleanor, immediately flashed in my mind. She had always been a harsh, hypercritical woman who picked apart every little thing. But I never, ever imagined she could do something like this to her own granddaughter. Stay exactly where you are. Mommy is coming home right now. I spoke decisively, but even I couldn't hide the tremor in my voice. I could hear Lily taking quick, panicked breaths before whispering, "Mommy, I'm so cold." That sentence, to this day, I can never forget it. I hung up the phone, without wasting a single second of thought. My shaking hands opened an app, and I booked the earliest red-eye flight out of Chicago. Everything happened purely on reflex. There was no room for logic anymore. I only knew one thing. I had to get home immediately. On the way to the airport in an Uber, I kept calling home. I called my husband, David. He didn't answer. I called the landline. Silence. The crushing anxiety in my chest kept rising, forming a tight knot in my throat. Then, right at that moment, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't a familiar number. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it and read every word. That girl needs to be disciplined from a young age. Otherwise, she'll turn out exactly like her mother. I stared at the screen. A short sentence, but enough to make me understand everything. This wasn't an impulse. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. I squeezed my phone so hard, my knuckles turned white. The panic inside me vanished, replaced by a completely different emotion, a suffocating, icy rage that chilled me to my core. The Uber sped through the night, streetlights flashing across the window like long streaks of light. I sat there, staring straight ahead, my mind no longer forming coherent thoughts, just one repeating loop. If what my daughter said is true, if she is truly being treated like this, I will not let a single one of them live in peace. As the plane took off, I leaned my head against the window. The city below gradually shrank, its glittering lights fading into the dark. In that moment, I felt my heart settle in a bizarre, eerie way. No more tears, no more panic, just absolute coldness and determination. I closed my eyes, but the image of my little girl shivering in the dark remained burned into my mind. And I knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. I met David about 8 years ago, during a time when I was starting to feel exhausted by half-hearted relationships. David wasn't a smooth talker. He didn't know how to say sweet things to sweep someone off their feet. He was quiet, mild-mannered, and always carried a patient, calm demeanor. Back then, it was exactly that calmness that made me believe he was a man I could spend my life with, the kind of guy who wouldn't make his wife and kids suffer because of toxic machismo or bad habits. When we were dating, David treated me well. He'd pick me up after work, occasionally buy me pastries or a hot coffee, nothing grand, but enough to soften the heart of a woman looking for a stable home. I used to think a man didn't need to be exceptionally brilliant. He just needed to love his wife and put his family first. When David took me home to meet his mother, Eleanor, she greeted me with a perfectly measured, polite smile. She was so smooth that I completely failed to realize that behind her soft-spoken words lay a bed of sharp thorns. During my first dinner at my future in-laws' house, Eleanor warmly passed me the food, asked about my career and my parents, and smiled, saying, "It's so wonderful that modern girls like you are so independent." At the time, I felt lucky, thinking I had met an understanding mother-in-law. But right after that compliment, she casually added, her tone light as air, "I just hope that women who are so good at their corporate jobs are equally good at keeping a home." A lot of girls nowadays make a little money and think they own the world, but come home and don't know the first thing about taking care of a husband or children. Everyone at the table chuckled to brush it off, and I just smiled along, thinking it was just generic old-school advice from an elder. Looking back now, the red flags were waving from day one. I was just too naive and trusting of my own decency. I thought that if I lived honorably, respected my elders, and did the right things, I would eventually be loved. I wasn't the type of new daughter-in-law who wanted to compete, much less argue with her elders. I simply thought his family is my family now. If I treat them well, everything will be peaceful. That exact mindset cost me dearly. After we got married, I saw David's true personality more clearly. He was indeed mild-mannered, but that mildness wasn't the quiet strength of a mature man. It was the spineless cowardice of a man who didn't dare make a single decision. From major issues to the smallest details in our house, David looked to his mother. Buying a new cabinet, replacing the washer, deciding how much money to give for holidays, where to go on the weekend, everything had to be approved by Eleanor. Many times, I jokingly asked him, "Is this house for a husband and wife, or for you and your mother?" David would just laugh it off and tell me I was overthinking. But that laughing it off lasted year after year. As a result, even though I had a husband, I often felt like I was living as a third wheel in their mother-son relationship. When we were newlyweds, my career was much more stable than David's. I had a steady income and a solid position at my company, whereas David hopped from job to job, constantly complaining about toxic environments, low pay, or high stress. I never criticized him, and I certainly never used my higher salary to belittle him. On the contrary, I tried to cover the gaps. I paid for most of the household expenses, groceries, and bills. The paradox was that the primary breadwinner of the family was never allowed to make decisions. The money I earned, how it was spent, who it was given to, how much was saved, Eleanor wanted to know, interfere with, and dictate. She didn't scream or curse like a stereotypical nightmare mother-in-law. The terrifying thing about Eleanor was that she always spoke in a very measured tone, but every sentence had a hidden hook. Whenever I came home late from work, she wouldn't directly say she was annoyed. She would just look at the clock and say vaguely, "When a woman comes home late too often, her husband and children are the ones who suffer." On days I was exhausted and hadn't cooked yet, she wouldn't yell. She would just sigh. In my day, even if you had a fever, you made sure your husband and kids had a proper meal before you dared to lie down. It sounded like she was just reminiscing, but hear it enough times and you understand, it was her way of reminding me that no matter how much money I made, in her eyes, my ultimate value as a woman was to serve her son. I remember one specific incident clearly. My company had a major quarterly wrap-up, so I came home almost 2 hours late. As soon as I walked in, Eleanor was sitting in the living room, her face neutral. She didn't ask if I had eaten or if I was tired. She just said one sentence: "Modern daughters-in-law might be good at making money, but they sure aren't good at being wives and mothers." Then she stood up and walked into the kitchen. I stood frozen at the door, my heart turning cold, but I told myself she'd just let it slip. David was home that day. Hearing his mother, he just gave a weak smile and told me, "Mom's just talking, don't overthink it. Mom's just talking." That phrase eventually became the ultimate shield for every outrageous thing that happened in that house. She made a sarcastic remark. "She's just talking," she nitpicked. "She's just an old lady set in her ways. She interfered in our marriage? Just let it go, to keep the peace." There were times I wondered why he even bothered getting a wife if he couldn't muster a single syllable to defend her from such venomous words. Then, I got pregnant with Lily. During that time, I thought, maybe having a grandchild will change things. I truly hoped a baby would soften Eleanor, make David grow up, and turn this house into a real family. I endured severe morning sickness, worked right up until my due date, and saved every penny to buy baby gear with all the excitement of a first-time mother. When I found out I was having a girl, I honestly just felt love and joy. To me, a child is a child, as long as they are healthy and safe. But the moment Eleanor found out the gender, a flash of profound disappointment crossed her face. She didn't say anything immediately, just stayed silent for a few seconds before saying, "Well, it's the firstborn. Boy or girl. It's fine." It sounded innocent, but the way she emphasized firstborn made it clear. She was still waiting for a grandson to carry on the family name. David, sitting next to her, just smiled, neither visibly happy nor openly sad. That lukewarm attitude infuriated me. It was as if the baby's gender wasn't a biological fact, but some sort of failure on my part. After Lily was born, I poured my soul into my family. I was terrified my daughter would grow up surrounded by coldness, so I tried to overcompensate by keeping the atmosphere as normal as possible. I worked, came home to take care of her, cooked, managed her medication and diapers, and operated on so little sleep I had permanent dark circles. Yet, I didn't dare complain. I just wanted my daughter to live a normal life, to be loved by her grandparents, cared for by her father, and raised with decency. But things didn't go as I planned. Eleanor blatantly favored David's older sister's son. Whatever that boy did, she praised him. Whatever good food she bought, she saved for him. Birthdays and holidays for him were extravagant. Meanwhile, my Lily was always treated with superficial indifference, like a placeholder grandchild. Once, I bought Lily a new dress. Eleanor took one look and stated flatly, "Girls just grow up to marry into another family. Why waste the investment?" I froze. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, "What do you mean by that, Eleanor?" She replied casually, "I'm just being realistic. Every family relies on their sons." I reacted. I wasn't disrespectful, but I made it very clear that in front of a child, she shouldn't show such blatant gender favoritism. But the moment David heard me, he immediately pulled me out of the room, lowering his voice. "What are you doing? Mom's just talking. Don't let it get to you." Again, that same phrase. Back then, I tried to swallow it, comforting myself that it was a generational divide, that older traditional folks still held onto archaic beliefs. I thought if I just softened up and stayed patient, things would pass. But I was wrong. And that mistake didn't just hurt me. It pushed my own daughter into a nightmare that, to this day, makes my chest physically ache whenever I think about it. As soon as Lily started talking and understanding the world, Eleanor began to interfere more deeply in how she was raised. At first, it was minor things so minor that if I complained, people might say I was being overly sensitive. She enforced strict schedules for eating, sleeping, and studying, rigid to the point of suffocation. By the time she was 5, Lily was forced to sit at the table at an exact time, back straight, feet perfectly positioned. No talking while chewing. Not a single crumb allowed to drop. If the little girl was even slightly slow or got distracted, Eleanor's face would darken, her voice turning to ice. "You can't even eat a meal properly. What useless thing are you going to grow up to be?" Initially, I thought, well, she's old-fashioned. A little strict discipline isn't entirely bad. But soon, that strictness revealed its true nature. It wasn't about teaching. It was about hyper-surveillance, constant criticism, and forcing a child to live in a perpetual state of terror. If Lily ate slowly, she was scolded. "Your handwriting is ugly," Eleanor would snap, tossing Lily's notebook on the table. One day, Lily was drinking water and accidentally spilled a few drops on the table. Eleanor shrieked, "What is wrong with your hands? You're as clumsy and useless as your mother." Standing in the kitchen, hearing that broke my heart. But every time I tried to intervene, David would pull me aside and whisper, "Kids need to be molded early. Mom's just a little tough. She doesn't mean anything by it. Doesn't mean anything by it." I heard that so much I could predict it before he even opened his mouth. "Mom berates our daughter. She doesn't mean anything by it. Mom insults me. She doesn't mean anything by it." It was as if in that house, I was the only crazy, sensitive one, and all the cruelty was just normal family dynamics. One afternoon, I remember clearly. I had an emergency meeting and came home about an hour late. Walking through the door, the house felt strangely quiet. No TV, no sound of Eleanor chatting. I walked quickly into the living room and froze. Lily was standing with her face pressed against the wall, her shoulders hunched, her little body trembling slightly. I was paralyzed for a second before I rushed over. "Lily, what's wrong?" She flinched and turned her head, her eyes red, her lips pressed tightly together as if trying not to cry. Before she could answer, Eleanor's voice rang out from behind me. She was disrespectful. She's being punished. I turned around, struggling to stay calm. What did she do to make you force her to stand facing the wall like this? Eleanor calmly sat down on the armchair, took a sip of her tea, and replied, I asked her how to solve a math problem. She had the nerve to argue back and say she didn't understand. When an adult is teaching you and you talk back saying you don't understand, if that isn't insolence, what is? I looked at my daughter. Lily whispered, her voice shaking. I just said I didn't understand the lesson. Her voice was so fragile. A gust of wind could have blown it away. A lump formed in my throat. I reached out to hug her shoulders and pull her away, but Eleanor slammed her hand down on the coffee table. Leave her there. You cannot be soft when disciplining children. You're at work all day. What do you know? Don't interfere. I looked up at her, a mixture of hot rage and sorrow rising in my chest. But she's just a little girl. Eleanor, if she doesn't understand the math, you explain it to her. Why make her stand facing a wall like a criminal? She gave a cold, dismissive smirk, the kind that sends shivers down your spine. That is exactly why you have no idea how to raise a child. If you don't break them early, they'll walk all over you. As long as I am alive in this house, I will teach my grandchild proper manners. David was sitting on the sofa the entire time. He had heard everything. He saw clearly how terrified his daughter was. Yet, he didn't open his mouth to defend us once. I looked at my husband, waiting for at least one fair word. But David just sighed and muttered, Let it go, Sarah. Mom's just trying to teach her. Don't make a scene. I'm exhausted. In that exact moment, my soul turned to ice. I was no longer just angry at Eleanor. I began to understand. The most terrifying thing in this house wasn't the cruelty of my mother-in-law. It was the silence of my husband. Sometimes, silence hurts more than a screaming match, because it proves someone sees the injustice and actively chooses to look the other way. After that day, I started paying closer attention to Lily's subtle changes. My once bubbly, vibrant girl was becoming silent. At dinner, she sat so rigidly her posture looked unnatural. She ate without daring to look up. If she didn't like a food, she wouldn't say a word. If she wanted seconds, she would glance at her grandmother first, asking permission with her eyes. One day, I put a piece of fish on her plate. She flinched and whispered, Am I going to get yelled at by Grandma for eating this, Mommy? Hearing her ask that felt like someone was crushing my heart. Meals in our house became suffocating, stripped of any familial warmth, replaced by sheer paranoia. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, maintaining the strict aura of a warden looking for infractions. David kept his head down, eating as fast as possible to avoid conflict. And I sat watching my daughter, my anxiety growing every single day. I brought up moving out to David multiple times. I didn't scream. I just gently suggested that the environment wasn't healthy for a child. But every time, David delayed. Sometimes, he said we couldn't afford it, a lie. Other times, he said moving out now would hurt his mom's feelings. Occasionally, he'd snap. Why do you always assume the worst about my mother? I didn't know what to call the feeling in my gut back then. It wasn't quite fear, nor was it clear enough to be a final conclusion. I just felt something was deeply wrong, that the strictness was abnormal, and that my daughter was shrinking inside her own home. But truthfully, at that time, I never anticipated that the reality behind these red flags was infinitely more cruel. Things began to spiral completely out of control after I had to leave for a week-long business trip. My company had an urgent project in another state, and my schedule was packed from dawn till dusk. Before I left, I repeatedly told David he had to keep an eye on Lily. She was already timid, and the slightest tension made her curl up like a wet cat. David nodded confidently. Don't worry. Focus on your work. Mom and I are here. Because of those words, I spent the Uber ride to the airport comforting myself that at least her father and grandmother were there. She wouldn't be neglected. I was dead wrong. The moment I stepped out of the house, Eleanor essentially seized absolute control. With me gone, she dropped all pretenses. The minor chores she used to test Lily with turned into a grueling daily regimen. A child as young as Lily was forced to wash all the dishes after dinner, mop every room, hand wash her own underwear, the hand towels, the rags. One day, Eleanor made her carry a small bucket of water back and forth across the backyard to get her used to hard labor. Even though Lily's arms were so tiny she stumbled after a few steps. Of course, I didn't see this with my own eyes at the time. Every night after work, I FaceTimed home. Lily always appeared on screen with her hair neatly tied, wearing nice clothes, forcing a smile onto her face. She would say, "I'm fine, Mommy. Don't worry." But as a mother, one look into her eyes told me everything was wrong. Her gaze wasn't natural. She kept darting her eyes off camera, looking terrified, as if someone was standing right off screen. Once I asked, "What did you do today, sweetie?" Before she could answer, Eleanor's voice boomed from the background. "She's been a perfect angel. Even helped Grandma sweep the house." My stomach dropped. I immediately said, "She's too young, Eleanor. Please don't make her do too many chores." She gave a dry laugh. "Kids in America have it too easy. They get spoiled. Learning to work early builds character." I asked David about it after the call. He just gave a dismissive reply. "Kids need discipline. Mom is doing her a favor." There was that tone again. That exact phrasing. As if every line crossed in this house could be justified if you just slapped the word discipline on it. I was furious, but being hundreds of miles away, all I could do was give him a few more instructions before hanging up. By then, the thorn in my side was aching constantly. On the fourth day of my trip, as I was walking through the hotel lobby, my phone rang. It was Brenda, a neighbor who lived 2 houses down. We weren't incredibly close, but she was friendly and kept an eye on the neighborhood. She hesitated before speaking. "Sarah, I really don't want to overstep, but I think you need to know. Lily's been getting screamed at a lot lately. I was walking my dog past your fence yesterday, and I heard your mother-in-law screaming at the top of her lungs. I saw Lily cowering in the backyard. It broke my heart. My entire body went hot. I frantically asked her what was going on, but she just added, 'I really think you need to keep a closer eye on her. The poor girl looks terrified lately.' That call left me standing frozen in the hotel lobby for a long time. I immediately called David, entirely losing my cool. 'What the hell are you doing at home that the neighbors have to call and tell me to look after my own child?' David got defensive and annoyed. 'You're at work. Focus on work. Don't listen to some nosy neighbor spreading gossip. If Mom is being strict, it's for her own good.' I gritted my teeth. What kind of good leaves my daughter terrified? David sighed, his voice rising in anger. 'You always blow things out of proportion. She gets yelled at a few times. So what? How else is she supposed to grow up?' I barely slept that night. The image of Lily looking down at the screen, saying I'm fine while avoiding eye contact, haunted me. I blamed myself for not being there, and my rage toward my husband's apathy reached a boiling point. How does a father view his daughter being screamed at and forced into labor as completely normal? But no matter how furious I was, I had to wait until the project wrapped up. I just prayed for the day I could fly back. The afternoon I finally returned, reality slapped me straight in the face. I hadn't told them exactly when I was arriving, hoping to surprise Lily. The front door was unlocked. The house was dead silent. I hurried into the living room and stopped dead in my tracks. Lily was lying curled up on the bare tile floor near the kitchen door. No pillow, no blanket. She was rolled into a tight ball like a kitten, her cheek pressed against the freezing tile. The weather had suddenly turned frigid in Chicago. Even adults were wearing heavy sweaters indoors. Yet, my daughter was sleeping on the cold floor. I rushed over and dropped to my knees, scooping her up. Her body was ice cold. When she opened her eyes and saw me, she gasped, then threw her arms around my neck, clinging to me for dear life, without saying a word. I whipped my head around to see Eleanor walking out of the kitchen. There wasn't a single trace of guilt on her face. My voice choked in my throat. "Why is she sleeping on the floor?" She answered matter-of-factly, as if it was nothing. "She spilled a pot of soup. I made her sleep there for a night so she'd remember." I couldn't believe my ears. "What are you talking about? She's just a child." Eleanor sneered. "Children need to be taught. Spoil them now, and they become garbage later." The rage exploded inside me. I stood up, holding my daughter, my voice shaking with fury. What kind of teaching leaves her on a freezing tile floor? What if she gets sick? She didn't even flinch. Her voice was ice. A little cold never killed anybody. Right at that moment, David walked in through the front door. I thought at the very least he would be shocked to see his daughter like this. But no. The moment he heard me raising my voice, his face darkened. He grabbed my arm, trying to pull me toward the hallway, his voice low and annoyed. "Don't make a scene. Mom doesn't like it." I stared at my husband. In that moment, I hit absolute rock bottom. My child was lying on a freezing floor, and his only concern was that his mother didn't like me making a scene. I asked him quietly, every word slicing out of my throat, "What about your daughter? Does she like it?" David stayed silent for a few seconds before muttering, "Just let it go. Keep the peace." That exact sentence made me realize a devastating truth. In this house, my voice meant absolutely nothing. I could be her mother, the one who feeds her, loves her, bleeds for her, but the second it conflicted with Eleanor, my concerns were dismissed as trivial annoyances. I felt completely helpless, an outsider in my own family. But I had no idea that all of this was just a prelude to a much more calculated cruelty waiting ahead. After the day, I found Lily curled up on the freezing tile, a permanent fracture formed in my soul. I was no longer naive enough to lie to myself that Eleanor was just strict, or that David was just mild-mannered but indecisive. When abuse happens once, you might call it a momentary lapse of temper. But when it repeats, when a child becomes increasingly terrified in her own home, it is no longer discipline. It is disguised tyranny. I started watching them like a hawk. And the more I watched, the more I realized Eleanor didn't just want to control Lily's diet or study habits. She wanted to break the girl's spirit and mold her into submission. She hated my parenting style. She hated that Lily clung to me. She especially hated that I worked, earned my own money, had a voice, and still wanted the final say over my own child. In her eyes, a child belonged entirely to the paternal bloodline. She had to obey her grandmother and fit perfectly into the mold Eleanor had built. And I was just a stubborn outsider with a paycheck who mistakenly thought she had rights. The simmering conflict finally exploded. It was a weekday evening. I had just picked Lily up from an after-school program. When we walked in, Eleanor was sitting in the living room, a small brown suitcase sitting in the middle of the floor. I paused, confused, but she spoke first, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. "This weekend, I'm taking Lily up to the country cabin for a few months. My relatives up there have real discipline. She stays here glued to you all day. She's going to be ruined." I thought I misheard. I stood perfectly still for a few seconds, then asked slowly, "You're taking my daughter away? What does that mean?" She looked at me, deadpan. "It means I've made a decision. She needs to be separated from you to stop clinging. She's too old to be up her mother's skirt. What is she going to achieve in life like this? Up in the country, she'll wake up early, do yard work, learn manners, and become a decent human being." Lily was hiding behind me. The moment she heard the country, she grabbed fistfuls of my coat. I could feel her tiny hands shaking. She might not have understood everything, but she understood she was being taken away from the only person who made her feel safe. I pulled my daughter closer and looked Eleanor dead in the eye. This was a rare moment where I didn't try to soften my tone. I enunciated every single word. "My daughter is not going anywhere, and she is certainly not a tool for you to enforce your authoritarian experiments. You can love her, you can teach her right from wrong, but you do not have the right to take her away just because you feel like it." Eleanor probably didn't expect me to challenge her so directly. Her face instantly darkened. The calm facade shattered, replaced by a sharp, lethal glare. Her mouth twisted, and her polite tone vanished. "What did you just say to me?" I stood my ground, one arm around my daughter, my other hand gripping my purse strap so hard my palm ached. I said, "Lily is my daughter. How she is raised is my decision. You call what you do discipline. I'm sorry. I don't accept it." That threw gasoline on the fire. Eleanor let out a bitter, spine-chilling laugh. Then, she dropped a sentence that would freeze my blood for years to come. "If that girl grows up to be anything like her mother, she'll destroy whatever house she lives in. A working-class woman who thinks about nothing but money and her career like you, what could you possibly teach her? If she stays near you, she'll just learn to talk back and think she's the center of the universe." Hearing that, I completely lost my composure. Not because she insulted me, but because she looked at her own granddaughter like a prop and object to be molded, dragged away, and severed from its mother at her whim. I knelt down and pulled Lily into my chest. The little girl was so terrified she was barely breathing. The mix of love for my child, rage, and sheer helplessness made my eyes burn. I looked up, my voice sounding incredibly foreign to me because it was so icy. "Do not ever bring up taking my daughter away again. She is not a doll you can snatch from her mother whenever you please." At that exact moment, David walked in. Hearing the argument, he froze in the doorway for a few seconds before approaching. I had a brief, fleeting hope just for a second that finally, this time, he would see his mother had crossed a massive line. But no, David looked at his mother, then at me, and said something so spinelessly weak it was devastating. "Can you just lower your voice?" That was it. He didn't ask what started it. He didn't care why his wife was yelling. He didn't look at his daughter's pale, terrified face as she clung to me. In an argument directly concerning the kidnapping of his own child, his only priority was that I lower my voice. I turned to my husband. In that moment, I genuinely didn't know whether to be angry or disgusted. I asked softly, "Did you hear what your mother just said?" David avoided my gaze, furrowing his brow as if I was the one causing trouble. "She's just looking out for Lily. Why do you always have to escalate everything?" That response was the final cut. I finally understood. In this house, if I didn't protect my daughter, no one ever would. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat next to her for a long time. She lay on her side, one hand still gripping the hem of my shirt, terrified that if she let go, I would disappear. I stroked her hair, listening to her shallow breathing, my mind a tangled mess. I knew I couldn't drag this out any longer. I seriously began plotting to move out, not out of impulse, but as a calculated decision. I planned to wait a few weeks, sort out my finances, find a suitable apartment, and then take her and leave for good. I wouldn't let her grow up controlled and degraded every single day. But right as I was preparing to make that move, my company informed me of a mandatory 5-day out-of-state trip for a massive account. I couldn't say no. I remember clearly the morning I left. My intuition felt like a boulder in my stomach. Still, I tried to act normal for Lily. I gave her stricter instructions than ever before. I told her to call me if anything happened. I told her to make sure she used her blanket. I told her not to be in the backyard alone unless I was home. She just hugged my neck, her eyes welling with tears. "You're only gone for a few days, right?" I kissed her forehead, hugging her so tight I felt like I was choking. "Yeah, Mommy will be back in a few days. Be a good girl. But if anything happens, tell me immediately. Promise?" As I walked out the door, I turned back to look at her one last time. Lily stood on the porch, a tiny figure, hands clasped tightly together, looking at me with an expression that shot a spike of pure, unadulterated dread through my heart. At the time, I just thought I was being an overly anxious mother. I never imagined that, in just a few short days, everything would spiral so rapidly, it would shatter every limit of a mother's endurance. My plane landed just before 3 a.m. The second the tires hit the tarmac, I practically sprinted to the exit, ignoring baggage claim, clutching only my purse and my phone. The entire Uber ride from O'Hare, my head was ringing, my heart hammering like someone was beating a drum against my ribs. I wasn't tired. I wasn't cold. I was driven entirely by a mix of pure panic and violent rage. As soon as I got in the car, I called David. He didn't answer the first time, or the second, or the third. On the fourth try, he finally picked up, his voice groggy and annoyed. "It's the middle of the night. Why are you calling so much?" Just hearing his voice made my blood boil. I forced out every syllable. "Where are you?" He paused, then mumbled dismissively, "I'm out with some buddies. I'm heading home soon." I ground my teeth, dropping my voice to an absolute chill. "Get home right now. Right now. If anything has happened to my daughter, I swear to God, I will ruin you." He must have caught the psychotic edge in my voice, because he went quiet for a few seconds before asking, "Did something happen to Lily?" I didn't have the patience to explain. I hung up. For the rest of the ride, the Uber sped down empty suburban streets, streetlights casting long, blurry shadows across the windows. I sat on the edge of the seat, my hands clenched until they went numb. My mind was consumed by a single image, my baby girl shivering in the dark, crying for her mother. When the car pulled up to the driveway, I threw the door open and sprinted out. Looking from the outside, the living room lights were on, meaning someone was awake. But the heavy front door was deadbolted from the inside. I pounded on the door relentlessly, screaming, "Eleanor! Open the door! Open the damn door!" No answer. I switched to yelling David's name, then Lily's. Still nothing. The house was lit, but terrifyingly silent. I started hammering the door, so hard. My hands burned, but I couldn't feel the pain. A few moments later, a neighbor from across the street stepped out onto his porch. A private neighborhood security patrol car driving by saw me and hit the brakes. The guard looked alarmed. "Ma'am, did you just get back from a trip? Why are you out here at this hour?" I could barely speak. "Please help me. My house is deadbolted from the inside, and my family is in there." Seeing my pale face, the guard didn't ask questions. He walked up and helped me bang on the door, shining his flashlight through the windows. Eventually, we had to get the neighbor to come over and help make noise. It took several more minutes before the sound of dragging slippers echoed from inside. The door clicked open a crack. Eleanor stood there, her hair perfectly neat, her face a mask of absolute indifference. Not a shred of surprise or panic. She looked me up and down, then furrowed her brow. "What are you doing back at this hour?" Hearing that, the blood froze in my veins. I didn't answer. I shoved past her and marched straight into the house. My first sensation was that the house was bright but disturbingly cold, a creepy, suppressed atmosphere, like a crime scene being actively covered up. I screamed, "Lily, where are you?" No answer. I whipped around to face Eleanor. "Where is my daughter?" She stood there, arms crossed, her tone utterly apathetic. "She's fine. You're being dramatic." That indifference sent me into a blind panic. I didn't wait. I ran straight to the back door and out into the yard. And then I saw it. In the far corner of the yard, by the brick wall, inside the chain-link dog run, under the weak glow of a motion sensor light, Lily was sitting curled into a ball, hugging her knees. She was wearing only a thin, long-sleeve pajama shirt, bare feet, hair disheveled. Next to her was an old, filthy dog bed, and the rank smell of damp earth and dog urine hit my nose, making me gag. For a fraction of a second, I stood paralyzed. Not because I didn't believe it, but because the sight was so monstrous my brain refused to process it. I charged forward, dropped to my knees, and ripped the gate open, pulling her into my arms. Her body was freezing, violently shaking. The second she saw me, she burst into wails. The sound shattered the night, releasing all the terror she had been holding back. "Mommy, Mommy." I crushed her against my chest, burying her face in my coat, my shaking hands rubbing her back. "Mommy's here. I've got you. I'm right here." But my own voice broke into a sob. Lily gasped for air between hiccups, unable to form a sentence. "Grandma said if I was bad, I had to sleep with a dog," she said. "If I cried, she'd lock me in longer." I picked her up, stood straight up, and spun around. Eleanor was standing on the back patio, arms still crossed, her face stone cold. I stared at her, my entire body vibrating with homicidal fury. "What the hell is wrong with you? She is a human being, not an animal." She gave a dry, mocking smile, the kind of smile that makes you realize you're dealing with pure evil. Teaching her her place. If I don't break her now, she'll grow up to be an insolent bitch like her mother. I thought I misheard. I took a step forward, holding Lily tighter. "Are you out of your mind? Look how little she is." Not only did she feel zero remorse, she actually raised an eyebrow. "If you don't discipline children, they turn to trash." What I did was a mercy. Right at that moment, tires screeched in the driveway. David ran into the backyard, looking disoriented. When he saw me holding Lily in the middle of the lawn, and his mother standing on the patio, he froze. I looked at my husband, waiting for the reaction of a normal, protective father. Instead, David stammered, I'm sure Mom was just scaring her, Sarah." That one sentence was all it took. Every last drop of hope I had evaporated. I stood in the middle of that yard, clutching my shivering daughter, looking at my mother-in-law, looking at my husband, looking at the house I had tried so desperately to keep intact with years of silent suffering. In that exact moment, something inside me permanently snapped. I was done enduring. I was done keeping the peace. I was done turning a blind eye. I was left with one single, crystal clear, icy thought. From this second on, I will destroy them. I carried Lily into her room, locked the door, and set her on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking so badly I had to take several deep breaths just to unbutton her thin pajama shirt. Her skin was freezing, especially her hands and feet. I rushed to the bathroom, grabbed a warm, damp towel, wiped her down, dressed her in thick fleece pajamas, and wrapped her in a heavy comforter. Through it all, Lily stopped wailing, but her body kept spasming in violent jerks. Every time there was a sound outside the door, her eyes widened in sheer panic, like a trapped bird. I sat next to her, pulling her tightly against my side. "It's okay now. Mommy's here." I repeated it over and over, soothing her, but also trying to soothe my own racing mind. But the longer I held her, the more a strange, dark feeling crept into my chest. It wasn't just the heartbreak of seeing her abused. It was a terrifying intuition that behind tonight's events lay something much more sinister that I didn't fully understand yet. Lily pressed her face into my chest for a long time before she finally looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot, her eyelashes wet. I stroked her hair and asked as gently as I could, "Tell Mommy, what happened from the time you got home from school until now?" She bit her lip, her hands gripping my shirt tightly, as if simply speaking the words would summon the nightmare back. I didn't push. I just rubbed her back rhythmically. After a few minutes, she whispered, "Grandma said I had to listen to her, or she would punish me." I asked slowly, "What did she make you do?" Lily lowered her head, her voice tiny. "Grandma made me call you. She taught me to say you had to send her money. She said if you didn't give her money, I would be punished." The moment those words left her mouth, my entire body went numb. It felt like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. I stared at her, not blinking, desperate to make sure I hadn't misheard. "Say that again, for Mommy." She looked terrified, darting her eyes toward the locked door. "Grandma said I had to say, Mommy, if you don't send money, Grandma won't buy me food." Then she hit me, and she locked me outside. I was paralyzed. My mind instantly replayed all of Lily's recent phone calls. The time she randomly called me while I was in meetings, hesitating before saying, "Mommy, send Grandma some money." The times I thought she was just parroting something she overheard. One time she said, "Mommy, send Grandma money for milk, or she'll yell." Back then, I just assumed they actually needed groceries, or that Eleanor was too proud to ask me directly, so she made her granddaughter do it. I never, ever imagined, never dared to imagine that a child was being used as a mouthpiece, as an extortion tool against her own mother. Lily looked up at me, her chin quivering. "Mommy, I didn't want to say it, but Grandma said if I didn't listen, she'd never let me see you again." She broke down sobbing again, gasping for air. I crushed her against me, shaking violently with her. I understood now. I finally understood why her voice had sounded so unnatural on our calls lately, like she was reciting a script. I understood why, whenever I zelled the money, Eleanor never said thank you, acting as if I owed her a debt. The truth was, beneath the cruelty, lay calculated financial extortion. I wiped Lily's tears, forcing my voice to stay dead calm. "Besides making you ask for money, what else did she say to you?" Lily hiccuped and said timidly, "Grandma said you working all day means you don't love me, and only she cares about me. She said if I obey her, then you'll love me later." I squeezed my eyes shut. My chest felt like it was caving in, not from shock, but from pure revulsion. Such a small child, and this monster wasn't just screaming at her, wasn't just punishing her, she was systematically destroying her psychology, planting seeds of terror and guilt, and exploiting that innocence to manipulate me. "Did she say anything about tonight?" I asked, my voice turning gravelly. Lily nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "She said if I kept crying, she'd lock me out there longer. She said even if you came home, you couldn't save me. I couldn't sit still anymore." Every missing puzzle piece snapped into place with sickening clarity. The unknown numbers, the calls asking for cash, the Venmo transfers without clear reasons, the drastic changes in Lily's behavior on FaceTime. None of it was random. None of it was a loss of temper. This had been going on for a long time, meticulously planned. I tucked the blanket around Lily, told her to stay exactly where she was, and stood up. I unlocked the door and walked out. The living room lights were still glaring. Eleanor was sitting on the sofa, looking completely unfazed. David was leaning against the wall, avoiding eye contact. I marched straight up to them. No more beating around the bush. "You've been using my daughter to extort money from me, haven't you?" As the question left my mouth, even I noticed how bizarrely calm my voice was. It was terrifyingly flat. Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't even try to deny it. She just sneered. "Extort? That's a strong word. The money you make belongs to this household. I teach my granddaughter to demand what's rightfully hers. Is that a crime?" I glared at her. Rightfully hers? Her right to be threatened with being locked outside if her mother doesn't pay a ransom? She snapped back. "You sit in your fancy office playing boss while I'm stuck raising your kid. So, what if I take some of your cash? Do you think my babysitting is free?" Before I could respond, David jumped in, his voice a mix of exhaustion and annoyance. "You're taking this way out of proportion, Sarah. Mom just wants what's best for Lily. If you keep making these wild accusations, we can't even have a conversation." I whipped my head toward my husband and let out a cold laugh. "What's best? Locking her in a dog kennel? Or weaponizing her to squeeze money out of me?" David froze for a second but doubled down. Stop talking to my mother like that. That single sentence sealed it. I realized that it wasn't just Eleanor. This level of cruelty only survives because it has an enabler. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at this mother and son, and suddenly the reality of this house became crystal clear. The sarcastic remarks, the coerced phone calls, the absurd expenses, the barbaric punishments. None of these were isolated incidents. They were a calculated chain of abuse, and I finally realized that tonight wasn't just the first time she had snapped. It was simply the first time I caught her completely barefaced. I didn't go back to the bedroom immediately. After hearing Eleanor admit to using Lily to extort money, something inside me severed completely. All the years of biting my tongue, swallowing my dignity to keep the peace. In this exact moment, it all felt hilariously pathetic. I turned around, walked into the bedroom, grabbed my phone, walked back out, and stood in the center of the room. My voice wasn't loud, but it was razor sharp. Sit down, both of you. We are finishing this right now. Maybe neither Eleanor nor David were used to seeing me like this. This wasn't hysterical, loud anger. It was the lethal calmness of a woman pushed into a corner who had just found a loaded gun. David stood glued to the spot near the sofa, blinking rapidly. Eleanor remained seated, her chin tilted up, looking like she still held the moral high ground. I dragged a chair over, forced David to sit opposite his mother, and sat at the head of the coffee table. The bedroom door was closed, my daughter shivering under the covers inside. Just the thought of it made my hands tremble. I placed my phone on the table and hit play on the voice recording of the call from earlier that night. The living room was instantly filled with Lily's broken, gasping sobs. "Mommy, Grandma made me sleep in the dog kennel. I'm so scared." Her tiny voice shook violently, accompanied by the barking dog and the metallic clatter of the lock. Every second of audio made my scalp prickle. I didn't look at the phone. I kept my eyes locked on the two of them. When the recording ended, the room was so dead silent you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. I turned the phone toward Eleanor, my voice low, articulating every word. "Explain this. Is this what you call discipline?" She wasn't nearly as flustered as I expected. In fact, she scoffed, picked up her mug, took a sip, and slammed it back onto the coaster. "Everything I do is for this family. You make a few bucks and think you're God. But you don't know the first thing about raising a kid. If someone doesn't teach her, she'll walk all over us." The blood rushed to my face. "You call locking a child in an outdoor dog cage teaching?" My voice cracked like a whip. She immediately fired back. "Do you think kids are made of glass? If she acts like trash, she gets treated like trash. I raised my kids through much worse, and nobody died." I slammed my palm down on the coffee table. The crack made David jump out of his skin. "You do not have the right to torture my daughter." I hissed through my teeth. "I don't care who the hell you think you are. You have no right." Eleanor leaned back into the sofa, her lips curling into a venomous smirk. "If you want to raise her, hand over the cash. If not, let me do my job. You think raising a brat is easy? Food, school, electricity, water, random expenses. Who pays for it? You're gone all day. If she grows up into an insolent little bitch, who's to blame but you?" That sentence felt like a slap to the face. Not because it hurt, but because it laid everything bare. Finally, I understood. In her eyes, Lily wasn't a grandchild to be loved. She was leverage, a pawn, a hostage she could use to control me. I turned to David. From the beginning until now, he had just sat there, hands clasped tightly together, his eyes darting from his mother to the floor. A father, listening to a recording of his daughter sobbing from inside a dog kennel, sitting completely paralyzed like a phantom. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, the sheer, pathetic cowardice of this man made me physically nauseous. "Speak," I demanded, my voice slow and freezing. "Make your choice. Your family, or your pathetic, cowardly silence." David swallowed hard, his lips moving but no sound coming out. I didn't let up. "You heard the recording. You see how your daughter is treated. Are you going to say anything? Or are you going to tell me again that mom's just doing what's best?" David kept his head down, whispering, "Sarah, please calm down. Let's talk about this reasonably." I let out a laugh, a bitter, hollow sound that scared even me. "Reasonably? How long do you want to wait? Until she gets locked in a cage again? Or until she grows up terrified of her own shadow every time she sees her grandmother? And we just call that normal?" David went totally mute. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Eleanor jumped right in, her voice dripping with acidic pride. He's my son. He knows his place and respects his elders. Unlike a disrespectful brat like you. I stopped looking at her. My eyes stayed pinned to my husband. I had waited for just one sentence, just one defense of our child, one admission that his mother was a monster. But there was nothing. David just sat there, his shoulders hunched, staring at the floorboards as if praying that if he just ignored it long enough, it would magically blow over. That silence was the final answer. It spoke louder than any excuse, hurt more than any insult. I realized that this man would never, ever choose me or my daughter when forced to stand up to his mother. He knew right from wrong. He knew it was horrific. He even knew he was a coward. But he still chose to bow his head. And when a father chooses to bow to his abuser, his daughter has no one left in the world but her mother. I sat up perfectly straight. I felt something inside me finally collapse into dust, but simultaneously, a pillar of steel rose in its place. No more hope. No more waiting. No more delusions that this house could ever be a home if I just compromised a little more. I looked at David one last time, watching him stare at the floor. And in that moment, I fully woke up. After the confrontation that night, the house fell into an unnatural, suffocating silence. Gone was Eleanor's shrill nagging. Gone was David's passive-aggressive huffing whenever I brought up Lily. But that silence was far more oppressive than the screaming matches. It was like the eerie calm of a lake before a supercell flat on the surface, but with a pitch-black undercurrent churning below. The next morning, Eleanor didn't say a single word to me. She walked around the house with a stone-cold face, shooting me glares sharper than knives. It wasn't her usual nitpicking look. It was pure, compressed hatred, waiting for the exact moment to strike. A few times I caught her standing in the kitchen doorway, staring up at my bedroom with a look so venomous it made the hair on my arms stand up. David chose his classic avoidance strategy. He left for work early, came home late, and buried his face in his phone the second dinner was over, bolting to his office as if nothing had happened. It was his signature move, hide until the heat dies down. But this time, I knew I wasn't going to let things fade away. Lily clung to me like a shadow. When I went to the kitchen, she trailed behind me. When I went to the bathroom, she sat outside the door. At night, she gripped my arm so hard my circulation stopped, but I didn't dare move. The faintest sound of Eleanor's slippers in the hallway made Lily's shoulders violently jerk, her eyes snapping wide open. One night, I told her, "Go to sleep, sweetie. Mommy's right here." She whispered back, terrified, "Mommy, don't let Grandma take me away." Just that one sentence was enough to crush my heart. I knew her trauma wasn't temporary. It had clawed its way into her brain and become a genuine phobia. I started doing what I should have done months ago. I didn't tell anyone, and I didn't change my outward behavior. But in my head, I mapped out a meticulous war plan. The first thing I did was text an old college friend who was now a family law attorney in Chicago. I didn't type a long sob story. I just wrote, "I need you to look into some things regarding child custody and marital assets for me." Less than 30 minutes later, he called. I stepped out onto the balcony, keeping my voice low but explicitly detailing everything that had happened. He was quiet for a long time before saying, "Sarah, do not take this lightly. Start securing all your evidence right now." Today, after hanging up, I sat in front of my laptop and combed through every bank statement, Zelle history, Venmo transaction, and joint account record from the last year and a half. Initially, I just wanted to verify my memory, but the deeper I dug, the colder I felt. There were dozens of transfers with vague memos, like groceries, school supplies, or household bills. But when added up, the sum was staggering. Some months, the money drained out was double our normal living expenses. I had always trusted them, so I never audited the accounts. Looking at the ledger now, I saw how breathtakingly stupid I had been. I sat with a notepad, calculating the amounts, my hand cramping from gripping the pen in sheer rage. There were large transfers that coincided exactly with the days Lily had called begging me for money. There were other days where, a day or two after I sent money, another mystery transfer would occur that I had zero memory of authorizing. I checked my phone's transaction history and discovered something that made my scalp tingle. Specific confirmation emails and text alerts had been deleted from my phone. Not all of them, just the suspicious ones. The inbox had been sanitized. I pulled up my archived emails and called the bank to request hard copies. The bank confirmed the history. I sat frozen staring at the screen, my heart thumping loudly in my ears. My phone was passcode protected, But there had been times I left it on the kitchen counter while showering, fell asleep on the sofa, or was distracted bathing Lily. I suddenly remembered David taking my phone, saying, "I'll put this on the charger for you." I remembered Eleanor casually asking for my passcode, just in case there's an emergency with Lily and I need to call you. I hadn't thought twice about it. Thinking about it now made me physically sick. I realized they weren't just using my daughter as emotional leverage. They were actively siphoning my finances through my own complacent trust. That day, I changed every password to my phone, my banking apps, my emails, and my laptop. I didn't confront them. I didn't let my mask slip. On the outside, I went to work, picked up Lily, and cooked dinner just like always. But inside, I was no longer the woman who swallowed her pride to keep a happy home. I analyzed every look, every gesture from David and Eleanor. And then, one night, I heard the conversation that confirmed every single one of my worst fears. I was walking to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I passed Eleanor's bedroom, the door was cracked open. I heard David's older sister, Claire, inside. They were speaking in hushed tones, but in the dead of night, the words drifted right into the hallway. Eleanor's voice was dripping with smug satisfaction. "That kid is terrified. All you have to do is threaten her, and she falls in line. Just use the kid to squeeze Sarah. She'll cough up the money every time." Claire gave a low chuckle. "You just need to push a little harder, Mom. Women like her are only scared of seeing their kids suffer." I stopped dead in my tracks, my hand gripping my water glass, so tight my knuckles screamed in pain. So it was true. They knew exactly what my weak point was, Lily, and they had orchestrated a campaign to strike exactly where it hurt most. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. I quietly walked back to my room, set the glass on the nightstand, and looked at my sleeping daughter. Even in her sleep, her face was tense, her eyelashes fluttering, as if fighting off a nightmare. I reached out and stroked her hair, a paralyzing ache radiating through my chest. In that moment, I knew I had absolutely no way out but forward. If I softened, if I waited, if I hoped these monsters would magically grow a conscience, I would be the one condemning my daughter back to hell. I pulled the covers over Lily and stared at her innocent face for a long time. The burning, impulsive rage was gone, replaced by an absolute, clinical coldness. This time, I thought, I'm not just going to fight back. I'm going to end you all. After hearing Eleanor and Claire whispering in the hallway that night, I didn't sleep a wink, but I didn't lie there crying or agonizing over it, either. I sat at the small desk in my bedroom, opened my laptop and my phone, and laid out my entire arsenal. Voice recordings, texts, PDF bank statements, and the photos I had secretly taken of Lily's freezing, filthy feet when I carried her out of the dog kennel. I knew that if I operated on emotion, I would lose. If I wanted to save my daughter, I had to be more calculated than they were. I organized everything like a detective building a murder case. First, the audio of Lily crying from the kennel. Next, a newer recording I had managed to capture of Eleanor admitting she taught her granddaughter to demand her rights, and the audio of her telling Claire, "Use the kid to squeeze Sarah." I backed everything up to a hidden cloud drive and emailed copies to a secure address. I wasn't going to allow a single slip-up to put my daughter and me back at their mercy. Then came the photos, the dark backyard, the wire cage, the dirty dog bed, the concrete slab where they locked her. I took pictures of the thin pajamas Lily wore that night, and the faint red bruises on her wrists where she had been dragged. Every time I looked at those files, my hands shook, but I forced myself to keep going. I needed the pain to stay fresh. I needed it documented, so that no one could ever gaslight me into believing I overreacted. Then I moved to the financials. Pages of spreadsheets, cold, hard numbers that were infinitely more damning than any argument. I highlighted the fraudulent transfers, cross-referencing them with the dates Lily begged for money. The deeper I went, the more obvious it was. This was a systematic, premeditated operation, built on the assumption that I would endure anything for my child. Right as I was finishing, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk to check a file of old property documents I rarely looked at, assuming they were irrelevant. And that was where I found the detail that made me stop breathing for a full minute. The house we lived in, a 4-bedroom in a nice Chicago suburb, was solely in my name. It was a premarital asset I had bought using my own savings and a sizable gift from my parents. The deed was finalized well before the wedding. Because David moved in after we married, and because he and Eleanor constantly referred to it as our family home, I had somehow allowed myself to be brainwashed into feeling like I had no authority over the property. I flipped through every page, reading every clause. My name was the only one on the deed, crystal clear. No joint tenancy. No quitclaim deed adding David. No legal standing for him whatsoever. My first reaction wasn't relief. It was sheer terror at my own blindness. They weren't just trying to drain my salary. They were living rent-free in a house I owned, using my daughter to extort me, and slowly manipulating me into believing I was a guest in my own home. I sat up straight, my mind sharper than it had been in years. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to erase my existence entirely. From that second on, I changed the game. I couldn't confront them yet. I needed them to believe I had surrendered, that I was too terrified of losing Lily to fight back. I needed them arrogant. Arrogance breeds mistakes. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen just like any other day. I made breakfast. I stayed quiet. I gave Eleanor the distinct impression that the explosive fight from the other night was just a tantrum, and that I was exhausted and ready to yield. She eyed me suspiciously, but I didn't break eye contact, maintaining a dull, defeated expression. At lunchtime, I finally spoke. I looked at Eleanor, my voice flat and monotone. If you want money, I can give it to you. But from now on, you let me handle Lily's discipline. Her head snapped up, her eyes gleaming. It was the exact look of a predator watching its prey step into the snare. A split second later, she switched to a sickeningly sweet, fake tone. See? This is how adults communicate. You should listen when your elders give advice. What good does making a scene do? I looked down and put some food on Lily's plate. I didn't argue. In my head, I was screaming, "Keep talking. Keep thinking you won." David, sitting next to me, let out a massive sigh of relief, looking like a man pardoned from death row. I turned to my husband, my voice so calm it surprised even him. "I'll transfer more money to the joint account. But I want transparency. I need to know what's being spent and on whom." David blinked rapidly, nodding enthusiastically. Yeah, of course. Transparency is good. That's fair." Looking at his face, I almost burst into bitter laughter. A grown man, relieved that his wife was paying his mother ransom money, believing that a few wire transfers would sweep his complicity under the rug. But they had no idea. That very afternoon, I securely sent the entire dossier to my lawyer. I set up an in-person meeting, bringing the deed, the bank statements, the audio files, the photos. I organized everything chronologically. I even made a separate, heavily documented file regarding Lily's abuse. Because I knew one thing for certain. If I wanted to cut this cancer out of my life, screaming in the living room wouldn't do it. I had to drag them into an arena where their manipulations meant absolutely nothing. That night, standing alone in my bathroom, I stared at my reflection. My face was gaunt, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. I saw the pain, the regret of letting it go this far. But beneath all that, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Absolute ruthlessness. I gave my reflection a cold, unfamiliar smile. "You think I'm surrendering, but I'm just loading the gun." The next morning, I casually mentioned to the family that I was cooking a massive dinner that night, so we could sit down and clear the air. I purposely used the exhausted, defeated tone of a woman who just wanted the drama to end. Eleanor shot me a look, the corners of her mouth twitching in triumph. She fully believed I was throwing in the towel. David looked like a massive weight had been lifted off his chest, even asking enthusiastically, should I leave work early? I just nodded. By noon, I even called my sister-in-law, Claire, and invited her over so the whole family could be together. I knew exactly what I was doing. To rip the masks off these people, I needed the entire cast present, every single person who had participated, cheered it on, or turned a blind eye. I spent the whole afternoon cooking my usual dishes, paying even more attention to detail than normal. I wanted the facade to be flawless. I wanted it to look exactly like a peace offering that any normal person would accept as submission. Lily sat in the corner of the kitchen, watching me with nervous eyes. I pulled her aside and whispered, "Tonight, you sit right next to Mommy. You don't have to be scared of anything. I promise." She nodded, her tiny hands gripping my sweater like a lifeline. Her fear only fueled my adrenaline. I couldn't afford to be weak. Dinner was served. Everyone gathered around the dining table. Eleanor took her usual spot at the head, radiating the smug energy of a conquering general. As soon as she sat down, she adjusted her blouse and threw out a passive-aggressive jab. "If you had just been reasonable earlier, we wouldn't have had all this drama. You tear the house apart, but you always end up back at this table anyway." Claire chuckled in agreement. David avoided looking at me, aggressively picking at his salmon. The classic maneuver of a man who thinks ignoring the problem makes it disappear. I didn't respond. I pulled a chair out for Lily right next to me. Then, I took my phone out and placed it face down on the table, right by my right hand. My movements were slow, deliberate, and ice cold. A few minutes into the meal, Eleanor launched into her favorite topic. She glanced at Lily, then let out a theatrical sigh loud enough for the whole room to hear. This family name is going to die out, all because we couldn't even manage to produce a single boy. Her words dropped into the room like a lit match in a powder keg. Claire froze. David's head snapped up, then quickly dropped back down. I set my fork down. I looked up, locking eyes directly with Eleanor. So, the family name dying out is your justification for torturing your own granddaughter? The air in the dining room turned to stone. Eleanor's face instantly went dark, but she tried to play the offended matriarch. Watch your mouth. I discipline my grandchild. I have never tortured anyone. David turned to me, his voice a frantic, panicked whisper. What are you doing, Sarah? I didn't look at him. I picked up my phone, unlocked it, pulled up the video file I had prepped, and set it dead center on the table, turning the screen so they could all see. The bright glare of the phone illuminated their faces. On the screen was the backyard from that night, the chain-link kennel, the freezing concrete, and my daughter huddled in a ball inside it. Lily's sobbing played softly, but in the dead silence of the room, it was deafening. No one spoke. Claire's face drained of color. David looked like he had been struck by lightning. Eleanor's lips were pressed into a tight, thin line, her knuckles white around her water glass. I let the entire video play out. Then I turned it off. I wasn't flushed. My voice didn't rise. My absolute calm is what made the room so suffocating. But I wasn't finished. I opened another audio file, the one I had listened to 100 times over the last few nights. From the phone speakers, a young woman's voice played whiny, overly sweet, and nauseatingly desperate. Just go home and deal with your mom, babe. Don't worry. I'll give you the son you guys want. The moment that sentence finished, it felt like the oxygen was sucked out of the room. I slowly turned my head to look at David. There was nowhere left for him to hide. Explain it to me, David. What does give you the son you guys want mean? David's face turned ash gray. His fork slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against his porcelain plate. His mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. In that split second, every lie he had ever prepared evaporated from his brain. I didn't rush him. I just stared, letting the silence stretch until the pathetic, repulsive cowardice of my husband was fully exposed for the entire table to see. Eleanor was the first to react. She slammed her hand down on the table, her voice screeching. What kind of garbage are you making up to humiliate your husband? Men network, they talk to people, women flirt with them, it means nothing. I let out a laugh, but there was zero warmth in it. Nothing? Is it nothing that a woman is promising to breed him a son? Is it nothing that you treat this little girl like trash, like a weed to be pulled, just because she doesn't have the right anatomy? Lily cowered beside me, her hand gripping mine. I squeezed her hand tight, my eyes burning into every person at that table. I didn't see my husband, my mother-in-law, or my sister-in-law anymore. I saw a pack of vultures who treated my child like garbage, used me as an ATM, and were actively plotting to replace us with a new heir. I spoke slowly, letting each word hit like a hammer. So this is what it was. My daughter was abused to clear the path for your bastard son. No one touched their food. The smell of dinner hung in the air, but the atmosphere was so thick it was hard to breathe. David sat, paralyzed, bloodless. Claire looked frantically between me and her brother, terrified, but wanting to defend her family out of pure reflex. Eleanor recovered from her shock and sat up straighter, deciding to drop the act entirely. I unlocked my phone again. This time, it wasn't a short audio clip. I opened a folder of screenshots I had forwarded from his accounts. I swiped through them, pushing the phone directly in front of David. Read them. Read them out loud. Or should I do it for you? His hands shook uncontrollably as he saw the name Jessica on the screen. The text required zero interpretation. Don't worry. I'll give you a boy just like your mom wants. She says you can't let your legacy die. Your wife only gave you a girl. Who knows who gets the house when this is over? Every text that popped up made David's face grow paler. Not out of shame for betraying his wife, but the sheer panic of a rat caught in a trap. I wasn't shocked. Honestly, since hearing the mistress's voice, I had pieced it together. But guessing is one thing. Watching your husband and his mother actively plot to breed a male heir while discarding your own child like garbage is a completely different kind of agony. Eleanor stared at the phone for a few seconds, then spoke, her voice devoid of any pretense. Let's stop beating around the bush. I told him to go find someone to give him a son. Am I wrong? The words echoed in the dining room, chilling to the bone. Claire sucked in a breath. David kept his head down, his hands gripped white-knuckled in his lap. I just looked at Eleanor. I wasn't surprised. She finally said out loud the toxic ideology she had hidden behind her polite facade all these years. I asked quietly, "What did you just say?" She sneered, her eyes dead. I told him to go get a son. This family needs a male heir. What's wrong with that? If you can't give him one, he has to find someone who can. Are we supposed to let the family name die out? My throat tasted like ash. All this time, my giving birth to Lily wasn't just a disappointment to her. It was a crime. David finally spoke, his voice sounding like he was being strangled. I just wanted a boy. I laughed. The sound so bitter, it felt foreign to me. So that's why you let your own daughter get locked in a dog kennel? I asked, never breaking eye contact. David went rigid. His lips trembled, but he had no answer. I kept pushing, my voice dropping to a glacial whisper. Or was your thought process even simpler? Once you have your precious son, you don't need this one anymore. Once someone breeds you what you want, you don't care if my daughter and I live or die. David remained dead silent, and that silence was infinitely more repulsive than a confession. It proved he didn't just entertain the thought. He completely lacked the basic human decency to even deny it. Claire finally jumped in, her voice a mix of frustration and desperate rationalization. You're blowing this out of proportion. What do you want? Lots of men want sons. It's not the end of the world. I turned to her, my blood turning to ice. No, having an affair is disgusting enough. But using a child to extort money, threatening her, and physically locking her outside in the freezing cold because she's a girl, that's not something lots of men do. That's a felony. That word made all three of them freeze. Eleanor narrowed her eyes at me, trying to gauge if I was bluffing. Claire turned even whiter, and David's head snapped up. For the first time all night, he looked me directly in the eyes. I knew they were starting to panic, not because I uncovered the affair. They were panicked because they realized I was no longer going to handle this behind closed doors. I stood up. The metal legs of my chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. I picked up my phone, looking at each of them. My voice was low, but so authoritative they couldn't pretend not to hear. I already filed the reports with the police and Child Protective Services. David's face went slack. Reports? For what? He stammered, his voice cracking. I answered bluntly. Child abuse. Extortion. Endangering the welfare of a minor. And I have every single piece of evidence required to make sure you can't lie your way out of it. Eleanor shot up out of her chair, slamming her hands on the table. You wouldn't dare. I looked at her, zero hesitation left in my soul. I didn't just dare. I've been waiting for this exact moment. I turned to David, then to Claire, sweeping my gaze over the people who thought I would swallow this abuse forever in the name of family. From the second you turned my daughter into a pawn, I said slowly, you chose your own consequences. Outside, the autumn wind howled, rattling the patio door. Inside, no one dared to speak. I pulled Lily's chair back, stepping behind her, shielding her with my body. I stood tall, my heart as cold as a glacier. And tonight, I dropped my voice, hammering the final nail into the coffin, is the night you pay for it. The second those words left my mouth, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime. It was two sharp, heavy, authoritative knocks. The sound of absolute finality. Everyone at the table jumped. David stood up so fast, his chair crashed backward onto the floor. Claire whipped around toward the front hallway, her face sheet white. Eleanor froze for exactly 1 second before puffing her chest out, clinging to the delusion that she was untouchable. I didn't move an inch. I just looked toward the front door and said calmly, "Go open it." David stood paralyzed, his feet glued to the floorboards. I won't say it again. My voice was a blade. Open the door. He stumbled out of the dining room. As the door swung open, 2 uniformed police officers stood on the porch. Their posture was rigid, their expressions strictly professional. The lead officer spoke first. We are here responding to a formal complaint regarding child abuse and the endangerment of a minor. The moment those words echoed into the house, Eleanor's hand, which had been resting on the table, began to violently shake. But a second later, She lunged forward, pointing her finger toward the hallway, her voice shrill. What abuse? I was disciplining my grandchild. You can't arrest me for that. Her hysterical screeching proved she was genuinely terrified. Gone was the sophisticated matriarch, quoting family values. Faced with the actual law, her mask disintegrated instantly. I grabbed the thick manila envelope I had prepared from the chair next to me and walked into the living room. I am the one who filed the report. Officers, I said clearly, pulling out the contents. This is the video of the child being locked inside an outdoor dog kennel in freezing temperatures at 3 a.m. These are the audio recordings of the grandmother forcing the child to extort money from me under threat of physical isolation. And this is my formal statement, alongside the preliminary testimony of the child. With every piece of evidence I placed on the coffee table, David's face caved in a little more. Claire backed up against the dining room wall, trying to put as much distance between herself and us as possible, looking like she wanted to scrub the association off her skin. One officer picked up the file. The other looked directly at Eleanor, speaking slowly and clearly. Ma'am, based on the evidence provided, there is probable cause for child endangerment and abuse. We need you to come down to the station for questioning. The officer's voice wasn't loud, but it dropped the temperature in the room to sub-zero. David stood paralyzed in the center of the room. He looked at me, then at the cops, his mouth opening and closing before he finally stammered. Officer, can we just handle this internally? This is a private family matter. I turned to my husband, my insides turned to ice. Handle it internally? How long have you been handling it internally? I asked. From the moment she was screamed at, punished, forced to beg for money, to the night she was locked in a dog cage, what exactly did you handle? David choked on his words. Every word I said was an undeniable fact, and the truth is impossible to swallow when it implicates you. He dropped his head, his shoulders collapsing. But I felt absolutely zero pity for him. A father who watches his child be tortured to that degree and does nothing does not deserve a shred of sympathy. Eleanor completely lost her mind. She lunged forward, her face beet red, her eyes bulging. A shaking finger pointed right between my eyes. You destroyed this family. You vicious, evil bitch. You call the cops over a family disagreement? You are garbage. I stood perfectly still, watching her scream until her voice cracked. I didn't feel vindicated, nor did I feel scared. I had endured so much venom from this woman over the years that her words had lost all power to hurt me. I looked her dead in the eyes and spoke slowly. This family was destroyed the moment you turned your own granddaughter into a hostage. That made her pause, but it only fueled her rage. She started screaming again, but the officers stepped forward, commanding her to step back and comply. Ma'am, you need to come with us right now. If you resist, you will be placed in handcuffs, the lead officer warned. Hearing that, Eleanor's knees buckled slightly. Her aggressive bravado shrank into a pathetic, warped panic. Claire didn't utter a single syllable to defend her. David stood like a ghost, his eyes bloodshot, finally realizing that the comfortable bubble of cowardice he had lived in had just been blown to pieces. Since the police walked in, Lily had been clinging tightly to my waist, trembling slightly. I gently pushed her behind me, keeping one hand firmly on her shoulder. My other hand was clenched into a fist, but I never let go of her. As the officers escorted Eleanor toward the front door, she craned her neck back, her eyes burning with pure hatred, her voice raspy from screaming. You are going to pay for this. You're going to get what's coming to you. It hit me like a curse. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't bite my tongue. I knelt down, pulled Lily into a fierce hug, stroked her hair, which still smelled faintly of baby shampoo, and looked up at Eleanor's retreating figure. I already got what I wanted, I said, my voice dropping, devoid of anger, filled only with absolute certainty. I protected my daughter. You are getting exactly what you chose. She froze for a split second in the doorway before the officers guided her out into the night. The heavy front door clicked shut. The house plunged into a crushing silence. I hugged Lily tighter, feeling her tiny, rapid heartbeat against my chest, knowing that from this moment on, there was no going back. After Eleanor was taken away in the cruiser, the screaming stopped, but the house felt like its walls were lined with lead. Everything was exactly where it had been: the half-eaten dinner, the unbussed table, the pot of soup still giving off a faint wisp of steam. But the illusion of a happy family they had desperately clung to for years was annihilated. Claire was the first to run. She couldn't even look me in the eye. She just quietly grabbed her purse and slinked out the front door, as if moving fast enough would magically absolve her of her complicity. I didn't try to stop her. People like her don't matter anymore. David slumped onto the living room sofa, his head in his hands, his spine completely curved. I had never seen him look so utterly broken. But strangely, I didn't feel a single ounce of empathy. When a collapse happens this late, so late that the damage is already catastrophic, you don't feel pity. You just feel exhausted. Lily pressed herself against me, her eyes red and swollen after an incredibly traumatic evening. I picked her up, carried her to my bedroom, and lay beside her until she fell into an exhausted sleep. Only then did I walk back out. David was still in the exact same spot on the couch, his eyes bloodshot, his face haggard. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 hours. Hearing my footsteps, he looked up, his voice a pathetic rasp. I messed up, Sarah. I didn't answer. I just stood there, looking at him. My silence must have terrified him, because he started talking rapidly, terrified that if he stopped, he'd lose his chance forever. I was wrong. I was so wrong. But my mom pressured me. You know how she is. She wouldn't stop bringing it up. She kept pushing and pushing. I panicked. I listened to him, feeling a sickening mix of amusement and disgust. Even now, standing in the rubble of his life, his instinct was to push the blame onto someone else. I pulled up a chair across from him, sitting down and looking him dead in the eye. I spoke very slowly. No, David. You weren't pressured. You chose to listen. He froze, looking shocked that I had effortlessly severed the only lifeline he was trying to cling to. I continued, my voice steady and sharp. Your mother might have planted the idea. She might have filled your head with archaic garbage about needing a son. But you were the one who had an affair. You were the one who let your daughter be tortured. You were the one who stayed silent every single time she was treated like dirt. No one held a gun to your head and made you do those things. David dropped his head, his shoulders shaking slightly. He mumbled, I know I'm a coward. I cut him off. No, you're not just a coward. You are cruel. His head snapped up, his eyes wide. I didn't blink. The cruelest father isn't the one who hits his child, I said. It's the one who watches his child be abused and looks the other way. That is exactly what you are. I stood up, walked into my home office, and brought out a blue accordion folder. I dropped it onto the coffee table right in front of him and pushed it forward. Open it. His hands were shaking so violently that when he tried to turn the first page, a document slipped and fluttered to the floor. He leaned down to pick it up, his eyes scanning the text. The color completely drained from his face. I knew exactly what he was looking at. The property deed, the closing documents, the title, everything explicitly in my name, signed and notarized prior to our wedding. No David, no joint ownership, no family home loophole. He looked up, his lips trembling. The house is mine, I finished for him. Bought and paid for with my savings and my family's money before I ever married you. I grabbed a second stack of papers and dropped them next to the first. And these are my bank statements. I've already separated my personal savings from the joint accounts. Whatever financial safety net you thought you were entitled to is gone. David stared at the stacks of paper, looking like a man who had just had the blood drained from his veins. It took him a long time to choke out the words, I really get nothing. I looked at the man who used to be my husband and gave him a short, blunt answer. You get exactly what you earned. He looked up, a pathetic glimmer of hope in his eyes, thinking I was offering a negotiation. I delivered the final blow, my voice absolute ice. You get to pay the price. I reached into my bag, pulled out a final manila envelope, and dropped it on top of everything else. He didn't even need to pick it up to know what it was. Divorce papers. I clicked a pen and slid it across the glass table toward him. Sign it. Don't drag this out. David stared at the document for an eternity. For a moment, I thought he was going to pull his classic avoidance routine, but his trembling hand eventually picked up the pen. What about Lily? He asked, his voice pitifully small. My heart turned to absolute zero. Even now, he thought he had the right to utter her name? I didn't let him finish the thought. You forfeited her the second you went looking for a son. My words stopped his hand midair. I stared into his eyes, unblinking. Don't sit there and act like you have the right to play the victimized father. Being a father isn't just donating half your DNA and claiming the title when it's convenient. A father protects his child. You failed. David bowed his head. A single tear dropped onto the edge of the divorce decree, blurring the ink. But I felt absolutely nothing. His tears couldn't erase the night my daughter was locked in a dog kennel. They couldn't erase the terrified phone calls begging for ransom money. They couldn't rewind the years I spent foolishly believing that if I just endured enough, we would be a happy family. He finally put pen to paper. His signature was shaky and crooked, but it was legible enough to end it all. I took the papers, checked them over, and put them back into my folder. In that living room, no one spoke another word. There was no more arguing, no more blame, no more chances to turn back. There was just a ruined man sitting in the ashes of the life he destroyed, and a woman standing tall amid the wreckage of a marriage she had desperately tried to save with her own submission. The ink dried, and it was over. After everything went down, Lily and I didn't stay in that house for long. Legally, the house was mine, but there are places that, no matter how much you own them, are so saturated with tears, cruelty, and trauma that you can't bear to sleep there one more night. I moved us into a smaller apartment across the city. It wasn't as spacious, it wasn't as luxurious, but it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, it was just the two of us. No hypercritical stares, no passive-aggressive lectures, no walking on eggshells the moment we stepped out of the bedroom. The first few weeks were anything but easy. During the day, I went to work, and at night, I managed the legal nightmare, the divorce proceedings, and the psychological fallout of a child who had endured far beyond her limits. There were nights Lily would wake up screaming, shooting upright in bed, clutching me with a pale, terrified face. Sometimes, if a dog barked out on the street, she would physically recoil, diving under the blankets and gripping my arms so hard it left bruises. I just held her. I rocked her, rubbed her back, and whispered, "It's over, baby. It's never going to happen again." Every time it happened, my heart felt like it was being run through a meat grinder. Because I knew her terror wasn't just a bad dream. It was a lived reality, and I was the one who had let it go on for far too long. Thankfully, with time, genuine peace, and actual safety, my daughter slowly came back to me. Piece by piece. She started sleeping through the night. She stopped flinching at sudden noises. In the mornings, she would sit at the kitchen island to eat breakfast without darting her eyes around to check the mood of the room. When she came home from school, she started chattering again, proudly showing me a new drawing or singing a song she learned in music class. Those changes were small, but to me, they were like drops of warm water slowly melting a block of ice in my chest. One weekend evening, after we had finished dinner, I was sitting on the bed folding laundry while Lily lay on her stomach, resting her chin on her hands, watching me. The warm lamplight filled the room. Outside the window, the faint hum of city traffic drifted by. Everything was profoundly peaceful. She was quiet for a long time before suddenly asking, "Mommy, why did Grandma hate me so much?" My hands froze on a small t-shirt. Just that one question made my throat seize up. I knew this day would come. I had rehearsed the answer in my head 1,000 times, trying to figure out how to explain it without making a child feel like she was inherently flawed. But hearing it out loud still broke my heart. I set the laundry aside, pulled her close, and gently stroked her hair. I stayed quiet for a few seconds, searching for the exact right words she could understand, but wouldn't leave a permanent scar. I whispered, "It wasn't because you weren't good enough, sweetie. It was because the adults were wrong." Lily blinked up at me. I gave her a soft smile, forcing my voice to stay warm and steady. "You didn't do anything wrong. You are perfectly good, and you are just a little girl." Sometimes, adults have very broken, wrong ideas in their heads. They let those wrong ideas make them mean and cruel, but that brokenness belongs to them. It has nothing to do with you. She listened quietly, then slowly snuggled deeper into my arms. I held her, feeling her small warmth against me, my heart aching but finally feeling light. It was in moments like that when I realized my biggest regret. It wasn't the failed marriage. It wasn't the money I lost. It wasn't the horrific insults I endured from my in-laws. My biggest regret is that I didn't become ruthless sooner. I regretted believing in the virtue of keeping the peace. I regretted convincing myself that a child needs a complete family, a father, a mother, grandparents to grow up normally, forgetting that some houses are just hollow shells. If a home is a place where a child lives in constant terror, learning to read the room just to survive, being weaponized to control her mother, then what exactly are you preserving? Who are you preserving it for? And at what cost? Looking back at everything, I see their true faces with absolute clarity. A tyrannical mother-in-law consumed by archaic patriarchal obsessions, willing to torture her own flesh and blood. A spineless husband who let his mother brainwash him, who slid easily into infidelity, and who looked the other way while his daughter suffered. And caught in the middle of that darkness was a tiny girl used as a pawn. Just thinking about it makes my chest tight. But it was exactly those events that completely fundamentally changed me. If it wasn't for that midnight phone call, if I had kept lying to myself that things would eventually get better, I might have dragged out my own weakness for years. I hurt. I regretted. I agonized. But I refused to drown in it forever. Because ultimately, the most important thing isn't where I went wrong. It's how I live from now on so I never make that mistake again. I took Lily's hand, her tiny, soft fingers resting in my palm. I looked at her and spoke quietly, but with absolute conviction. I promise you, I will never let anyone make you feel scared ever again. She looked up at me and gave a tiny nod, as if, despite being so young, she understood exactly how heavy that promise was. I leaned down and kissed her forehead, pulled the covers over us, and turned off the lamp. That night, in our small apartment, just the two of us, I listened to her breathing steady into a deep sleep, and I felt my soul finally settle. I smiled in the dark, not because I had defeated anyone, not because I reveled in watching them face their consequences. I smiled because finally, after all the weakness, all the hesitation, and all the misplaced endurance, I had the courage to stand up when it mattered most.